Alright, I have my Jvc SR-MV55 VCR DVD combo deck. This is what I use to record all of my Apple VHSs, which I put up on Apple VHS archives, and that's pretty much all I use it for. And it does it really well. This is a really good VCR, especially for the price, because it's not a very commonly used one. So a lot of the sites that talk about archiving old VHS tapes, they don't mention this series specifically, mostly because they tend to stay away from DVD VHS combo decks because most of them are garbage. They're just consumer level ones that are made very cheaply and do a crappy job. This, however, is a professional player, and it has a built-in TBC, which is a time-based corrector, which helps correct the image, and it actually works surprisingly well. I've put in tapes that are basically unplayable. It just shows up as like just noise, and then you turn on the TBC, the picture comes back. Often it's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. And on a just moderately damaged tape, it actually repairs it to the point where it looks just like fantastic. So I've had really good luck with this. It has tons of features, and I don't know, I just really like the design of this thing, like just the design of the buttons. I'm not really sure why, I just really like it. So I constantly toy with buying a different model because they do make variations of this that don't have the VCR. They actually have a mini DV player. Some even have that and a hard drive. So you can record to the hard drive and then record out to the DVD drive and blah, blah, blah. And I constantly think, you know, maybe I should just pick one up for like 50 bucks just to have the complete set because I like the look so much. But so far I haven't done that. This thing is capable of recording to DVD and recording to VHS. So you can record directly from a VHS to a DVD. This thing will record basically anything, rewritable drives, DVD RAM, DVD-R, and it'll just record right to the disc. It also has Firewire input, but does not have an encoder, so you can't output Firewire. That's why I use this Canopus Firewire converter. It's basically a DV converter. You can take an analog signal or even a digital signal and it will just convert it into a simple Firewire output. Most of the controls on it apply to both the DVD and the VCR. However, certain things will just switch their function as you swap between the two modes. But for the most part, all the playback controls are the same, and it has a really advanced noise reduction system and all sorts of stuff built into the menu system, which is extremely primitive, but it does work. And usually once you set everything, you don't really need to set it again. My particular unit was made February 2007, which is kind of hard to believe that they were still making VCRs in 2007. It has a small fan on it, which makes basically no noise. I was going to replace it with a Noctua just because I do that with all fans. I think I'll just leave it as is because this thing makes no noise whatsoever. I don't think it needs much airflow. There's a bunch of digital outputs, optical and coax for the audio. These only apply to the DVD player, as do the component video out. And there's also a basic standard composite and S-video output for the DVD as well. There's inputs, either composite or S-video for the DVD and the VCR, so you can record from an analog source to both. There's also a combined DVD and VCR output, which is just standard S-video and composite, which is using a BNC connector. I just use the S-video and the audio out. There's a remote hookup. There's also a serial port on it. The serial port can basically completely control the VCR, and I actually designed a small board to act as a remote for it, since I can't seem to get any software to control it like Adobe Premiere. Like most things, I never finished the software for this thing. So it does do basic controls. It will let you control it, but it won't read back information. My initial plan was to have it show information on the LCD about its current status, basically mirror it, because it does actually output all this stuff and it's all well documented. You can just download a big PDF of all the commands, but I just never got around to doing it. The internals are pretty straightforward. It's divided into 4 basic sections: output, power supply, DVD, and the mechanical VCR components. Now, I'm not going to do complete teardown of this thing because I do use it and it's somewhat delicate with the hardware for the VCR and whatnot. The power supply, although nicely designed, has a weird mix of quality and questionable capacitors in it. The main filter cap is only rated for 85 degrees C, whereas most of the other caps are all 105 degrees C, and some of them are actually high quality Nippon Chemicon ones, although it does have some questionable ones down in here, but those are an easy replacement if I ever have to swap them out. Otherwise, the power supply seems decently made, with most of the larger components being lifted off the board so it doesn't heat up too much and gets a little bit of airflow with the fan. You can see the fan just connects in here with this little two-pin connector. Although a little bit dusty, the fan is a high-quality Nidec fan, and that explains why it doesn't make much noise. With the DVD drive lifted out of the way, there's just a shielded can that'll have just a standard DVD controller in it. And there's also the front board for all the controls, and not much else. There's a board below it that just has a few caps on it. There's a couple connections between each of the boards, and they use these really interesting ribbon style pin connectors. I've never really seen these before. They have a bend in them, I guess, to relieve a bit of stress, but they're actually individual pins just held together by a little bit of plastic. There's so many ribbon cables running everywhere inside this thing. They run from all the digital control boards over to the analog boards. There's ones for the different ports, although some of the connectors actually use PCBs that solder into the base of the board. But a lot of them, yeah, it's just ribbon cables running everywhere to every component on this thing. Here you can see the diagonal record heads. There are 4 of them on this particular unit. There's a large unpopulated section on this board, and it appears to be for an analog tuner section. So I guess there's a model somewhere that exists that has a RF tuner where you can record directly to the VCR or the DVD drive. One thing to note about the fan is that it does run continuously when it's plugged in, even when the unit's powered off. So this is what I use to digitize all the analog video from the VCR. This is a Canopus ADVC-100. There's a few different models. There's a 110, which is very similar to this, and then I think there's a higher model, like a 200 or whatever. You don't need that. Really, just the 100 or the 110 will do. The main difference between the two, the 110 and the 100, is that the 110 is powered by the Firewire interface completely, whereas this requires a 5-volt power adapter. I believe the 110 also blocks protected content that's blocked using microvision. So if you're copying commercially produced movies, you may want to get the 100. On the back, it's got a Firewire interface, S-video in, S-video out, a 3.5mm audio jack for input, and there's also a set of 3 RCA jacks for video and audio. They're outputs, power switch, and on this side, there's another DV connection. This is for hooking up your video camera. S-video in, composite video in, and audio in. Now, these are repeated on the back. Like, why is there a video in on the back as well? So I don't know why there's 2 inputs. I always just use the ones on the front just because it has the audio and S-video all together. And there's also a button that switches between the analog or digital inputs. There's some dip switches on the bottom for configuring a few things. There's also just the label, and it's actually made in Japan, and it says, "Attention, do not open the case!" Exclamation point. On the inside, it's actually quite densely packed on this board. It has quite a few things, and there's even components on the back, active components on the back, including some memory and what looks like a CPLD from Altera. The main chip is this NEC D72893GD, which from what I can tell is a 32-bit RISC CPU with some RAM, some ROM, an MPEG-2 encoder, and a Firewire interface all built into one. It seems to be pretty much integrated into just one chip, and you don't really need any other support hardware other than the odds passives and a way to bring in the analog signal. So there's a couple other parts here. There's a Philips part. This is a PAL NTSC decoder chip. Some flash memory. I wonder if there's firmware for this thing. Lots of filtering on all the inputs and outputs. Small power supply. In this corner, there's an NEC 8-bit microcontroller and a Burr Brown multi-clock generator, which is a PLL 1700. There's also a programming header right here, and these appear to be jumpers. I don't know what they're being used for. Copyright 2001, couple LEDs for the input selection. The construction of this thing is pretty nice, and it's nice to see actual components inside something like this instead of some magic chip that's just doing all the work and you're paying a couple $100 for next to nothing. This actually has lots of analog components and actually all quality name brand stuff, so they do actually earn their money on this one. Well, that's about it. Like I said, I didn't want to get too far into the VCR. Yeah, they've been serving me well. I actually got the VCR very cheap on eBay because when I purchased it, the guy was selling it as broken because it would turn on and it would just say loading. And he just said, oh, you know, it doesn't work. It's stuck at loading. There's some problem with it. And I got it for $50 or something like that. Turns out he just didn't wait long enough for it to stop loading, because after 10-20 seconds it boots up and works fine. So I don't know how rushed this guy was, but it just flashed loading a few times and he figured, oh, it's broken. So I got myself a good deal on that one.